Joe Biden is a failed president. She was a failed vice president, the worst president in the history, the worst vice president in history. He is incompetent. She's incompetent. Everything he's touched has been bad. Everything she's touched has turned to bad things. She can't talk. She can't talk.
In many ways, he's worse than Bernie.
She's worse than Bernie. Low IQ. He's a low IQ individual. She happens to be really a low IQ individual. She really does. She has a very low IQ.
This is man. This is like when Elton John changed like 3 words and then pretended Candle in the Wind was always about Diana. It wasn't. Very disrespectful to Maryland.
Jon Stewart in The Daily Show last night. Since last Tuesday, Vice President Harris and her running mate, Governor Tim Walz, have seen big crowds at their rallies across a number of swing states. Our next guest is looking at how a shortened campaign could help to maintain that enthusiasm. Joining us now, the editor-in-chief of Semafor, Ben Smith. He's out with a new piece titled, "Will Kamala Harris's Short Run Kill the Permanent Campaign?" Ben, good morning. Always good to see you. You've already confessed to me that this is perhaps just wishful thinking, but I think we can all wish for a moment. What have you learned from these 3 weeks of the campaign?
Well, I mean, I think it's extraordinary. We have this very strange tradition in the United States that a presidential campaign really lasts 2 years and is basically going all the time. If you want to run for president, you're raising money, you're talking, you're positioning yourself, you're governing only to the degree that it helps you run for president. And what you saw here, and I don't know if it can be replicated, is there's a real advantage to when your opponent has been slogging along for 2 years, just jumping in with not that much time, not enough time, among other things, for journalists to spend months doing investigations of your past, and also, but not enough time for voters to get sick of you. And I think that, and Harris certainly right now seems to be taking advantage of that. And I think if she wins, which she might not, both parties are going to look at like, should we restructure what we do so that we can jump in later? Should we push primaries into the summer?
It's obviously a unique circumstance when the President of the United States drops off and just hands the baton over. No primaries, none of that, which usually begin in January, which means you got to start the year before. Caddy K, but it has been, this is not a partisan statement or a political statement, refreshing to think of this as a short-run campaign.
Yeah, it's been fantastic. I'm loving it. The new kind of UK-style look of American elections. That, our British elections, obviously, Ben, you know this, it only lasts for 5 weeks. The election is called, and 5 weeks later you have it. You have the election, and I think this is important. The next day, the Prime Minister, if he's lost, is out of Downing Street, and the new guy moves in. So it's kind of pretty brutal. One difference that we're seeing between this election campaign and a short UK-style election campaign is, of course, the money. And Kamala Harris has raised, I think, in about the first day she was in the race, exactly what the whole of a UK election would cost, which is about $80 million. So it's kind of bargain basement democracy. And I wonder, if American elections going forwards, and I think you're right, this is probably a bit of wishful thinking on all our parts, would the money just blow up the idea that we could ever have short campaigns again? If you're going to carry on having no limits on how much can be raised, no limits on how much can be spent, then presumably there's always going to be a vested interest in having as long a campaign as possible.
Well, there's obviously a vested interest from the people who collect the money, political consultants, ad makers, television stations, and perhaps from those of us who are employed writing about it. But that is a huge difference with the UK. Of course, a shorter election is cheaper. And then the other big difference is that your political parties are composed, as far as my sort of outsider knowledge understands, of like 6 Oxford Dons and 1 Trotskyite is like each party. And they just kind of decide, whereas our parties focus on totally destroying all of the candidates in the nominating process, which is a different system.
So, Ben, even if, let's say, the structure doesn't change, like, the calendar doesn't change, the parties aren't going to move, could this, though, inspire a candidate to approach it differently? Because even this past year, there was some talk that, like, Glenn Youngkin was thinking of jumping in just before Iowa and New Hampshire, that maybe that burst of energy. Could that be something we see going forward?
Yeah, I think you see her a model for getting in late. But there are a lot of structural issues. Ballot access, obviously, being one of them. When the actual primaries are, is one of them, and that is really up to the parties to set those things. But it does show you in this faster media environment that there's a real advantage just to compressing your own presence in it.
Wishful thinking, perhaps, but we will continue to wish. Semaphor's Ben Smith. Great piece, Ben. Thanks so much. Good
Thanks
to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up, we'll look at how the Harris campaign has shifted the polling and forecasts for November's election. Nate Silver, formerly of the political website 538, just posted new numbers on his Substack. We'll tell you how Nate's looking at this election when we come right back.
Hey, welcome back to Morning Joe. Live look at the White House at 7:28 in the morning. Arizonans are going to have a chance to vote on the future of abortion access in their state this November. The Arizona for Abortion Access Act is going to appear on the state's general election ballot after a group of activists nearly doubled the number of signatures required. Arizona is now the 7th state that will formally include a ballot measure about abortion access this November, and at least 4 others have these measures pending. And Claire, you look at what's happening in Nevada, what's happening in Arizona, even what's happening in Florida. There's a constitutional amendment that's going to be on the ballot in Florida to overturn the 6-week ban there. Donald Trump a couple days ago would not even tell people how he was going to vote on that amendment, whether he was going to vote to overturn it or not. But this obviously, this is going to, it's got to be seen as a win for Democrats as far as helping the turnout operation. And we've seen this before in 2004 in another world, it seems. In 2004, Republicans put on, as you remember, a series of same-sex marriage bans, hoping to get more voters out. And now the shoe is on the other foot, so to speak. It seems that social issues like abortion actually motivate Democrats more to get out and vote. How's this going to impact Arizona and Nevada and possibly Florida?
Well, I think it's really good news, particularly in Arizona and Nevada for the presidential race. It's great news for the Senate races in all 3 states. First of all, it does drive low propensity voters that care about this issue, but frankly have gotten very tired of the divisive back and forth national politics. And keep in mind, a lot of people will tune out in the last 30 days because the commercial, both online and in traditional media sources, the traffic will be so heavy and so much that people will get very tired of hearing it. But this issue is a standalone issue that motivates voters. We saw it in 2022 when everyone thought it was going to be a disaster for the Democrats, and it turned out to be a pretty damn good election for the Democrats. And in Florida, you know, what kills me, Joe, about Florida, and you could speak to this probably better than anybody because you're on the ground there frequently, Rick Scott is not liked in Florida. Rick Scott has been around Florida for a long time and has a huge amount of negatives. The candidate, Debbie Marcuzzo Powell, running against him, is just 4 points behind. Forget about what you say about Trump having locked Florida up. Rick Scott has not locked Florida up, and that is a very big deal to this country because if the Democrats don't hold the Senate, even if Kamala Harris wins, it's not going to be easy to do the things that people want, especially around the issue of abortion.
You're right, Claire. The polling around that race in particular has some Republicans raising their eyebrows and worried about that seat in the Senate. So with several recent battleground state polls showing Kamala Harris gaining on Donald Trump, one prominent election forecaster now has Vice President Harris as the slight favorite to win the White House in November. Nate Silver, formerly of the website 538, now has his own Substack called the Silver Bulletin. Nate has just released an updated forecast that has the vice president narrowly favored to sweep the 3 Midwestern blue wall states and to carry Nevada. A sharp turnaround, of course, from where Nate had the race just a month ago, where he had Trump as a more than 2-to-1 favorite to beat Joe Biden. And Nate Silver joins us now. He's the author of the new book titled On the Edge, The Art of Risking Everything. And we'll get to that in just a moment. Nate, it's so good to see you.
Absolutely.
Repping the Yamamori Giants this morning.
Yeah,
too.
try to have a little fun. Up bright and early.
Sadahara Ho, Hideki Matsui also played for the Giants. Yeah, Jesse Barfield, Gabe Kapler.
Gabe Kapler, a favorite of mine. Also, Gabe Kapler spent 1 year in my fantasy baseball league as an owner. He didn't do very well.
Oh, he was in your league?
He was in the league.
Okay. Well, we love the hat. Let's talk about your forecast,
For sure.
First, so there's been a lot of talk about a vibe shift since Joe Biden got out of the race. You don't deal in vibes, you deal in data.
For sure.
So what are you seeing since then?
We've seen momentum for Harris with her rising consistently to about a 2.5-point lead in national polls. and more importantly, being a little bit ahead in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan.
And so to what do you credit that? Is it women who are moving over toward Kamala Harris? Is it swing voters who say they've made up their minds? Or how have you changed your forecast?
I mean, Donald Trump is not a very popular candidate, right? He lost the popular vote twice, lost the Electoral College last time. She has, I think, overperformed, I think, most people's expectations. But Democrats are actually pretty good at winning elections, right? They won in 2020. They had a good 2022, a good 2018. So maybe just a league average or league average plus Democrat is good enough to beat Trump. Although remember, the Electoral College has twice in the past 6 elections gone against Democrats when they won the popular vote. And the polls have been in error a couple of times, right? We saw Trump overperform his polls by a pretty wide margin the last time around. So that's why it is. I mean, if you're a poker player, then 54-46, that's an edge that you take. But for all intents and purposes, 50-50 jump ball toss up.
So certainly, I mean, you're dealing with numbers, you're dealing with the data, but you must get frustrated at times where people are yelling at you because of, especially in a moment like this where it's so tumultuous. We were just reminiscing. I mean, the assassination attempt on Donald Trump was just 1 month ago. You know, President Biden bowed out of the race only just over like 3 weeks ago. Things change so fast. That's just got to make everything you do harder.
Yeah, you don't usually have this much news compressed into this cycle. And now, of course, you have the DNC and then a debate. I mean, in some ways, this week, we're removed from the RNC. It's no longer such a shock that Harris is a candidate. This week might be an interesting one for polls for a baseline before this next series of major hurdles in the race.
So you have Trump as a slight favorite in Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina.
Yeah.
What about Nevada? That had been a state Democrats were very worried was getting away from them. What's changed there?
That state is now very slightly lean Harris, and it's the most emblematic of where Biden was struggling, right? I go to Nevada a lot for gambling purposes. But it's very working class, and it's also very diverse, right? You have a lot of Asian American, Black American, Hispanic American, working class people, and they are people who have moved away from Biden. And now the polling change there is dramatic. It was like +6 Trump, and now it's like +1 or 2 Harris, maybe more than that in some polls. So that shows you where her comparative advantage is.
And so the policies aren't very different, obviously, from Kamala Harris to Joe Biden. So is it just enthusiasm? Is it putting to bed the age issue?
I think it's 80 or 90% the age issue. I mean, voters said consistently, this is the number one problem. I mean, Biden's approval ratings have gone up a little bit since he dropped out because people just thought it was not responsible to run for president until he was 86. So, I mean, look, she has other issues. I mean, inflation and the border. But, you know, they've more than doubled their chance of winning the election overnight. And that's a pretty remarkable thing to do in the span of this crazy month that we've had.
And Claire, so just, again, this is just a moment in time. It's still August, 3 weeks now since Joe Biden dropped out and handed the baton effectively to Kamala Harris. But it has been extraordinary for all should we have an open convention? Should we let these governors get in? Who should it be? How quickly this party has not only rallied around, but been incredibly enthusiastic about Kamala Harris.
Yeah, it's been really fun, I think, for people who were very worried about Donald Trump getting in the Oval Office again. And you know what's really interesting about this, Willie, is that when Trump is marginalized and cornered, his instincts are not to track to the middle or to become more reasonable in what he says. He really gets more and more bizarre the more he feels pressure that he is losing. That's where the old "they're going to cheat" thing came from when he started worrying in April of 2020 that he couldn't win. So really what would change this trajectory of these polls would be something changing in the candidates. Now, the debate is a moment that could upset this momentum, but I'm trying to figure out what would really disrupt this momentum going forward for Kamala Harris, because I believe Trump will get worse and not better when he is confronted with reality of these polls day after day, to say nothing of the size of the crowds, which we all know the Harris crowds are his kryptonite.
And let's remember in 2020, when polls started showing him losing it for a little while, somewhat significantly to Joe Biden that spring. And that's when he started talking about the mail-in ballots. That's when he started talking about this is going to be rigged. The system's unfair. They're changing the rules because of the pandemic. What we're seeing now, I just want to flag this. He's starting to say again that the Democrats' candidate switch, going from Biden to Harris, he's using phrases like unconstitutional, illegal, it's not right. Seemingly like he's laying the groundwork for what comes next. The next time he's going to appeal or contest or refuse to accept the election results. We should note there's nothing in the Constitution about political parties. What they did is completely fine and accurate and legal. But I think people have already started flagging, like, let's watch that rhetoric here as he starts to look towards November.
Yeah, he's already softening the ground for a loss, and he can explain why it happened, like he did last time, through lies. So, Nate, what, in your view, could change over these next 3 months or so, the trajectory that you have it on, which is shifting toward Kamala Harris?
Look, I think she's run a very good campaign so far and has kind of proven that sometimes your second try is a lot better than your first. I think she may soon face the perception of being a front runner, which is a little bit of a different vibe, to use that term. Expectations are higher now. She may get more press scrutiny on the lack of press conferences, for example. It takes a lot of energy to both be vice president and run the campaign. But yeah, look, we have so many known unknowns, but also unknown unknowns. I mean, we wouldn't have known about, COVID a month until it happened in 2020. We wouldn't have known about the assassination attempt on Trump. And so it's more just saying we have a long way to go. History suggests that you have unpredictable news events, and the polling is pretty close, and the polling has been wrong before. So complacency could be one potential danger, not now, but in 3 weeks. If she has a good convention, is now up 5-6 points in these national polls, then complacency could be a little bit of a risk, I think.
And she does need to face questions that a lot of voters still have about her change in positions from when she ran last time until now. And she said she's abandoned some of those. Okay, let's turn to the book. It's called On the Edge, The Art of Risking Everything. So explain, if you would, Nate, for our viewers, the river and the village, and how that plays into the book.
So the village could be Morning Joe, for example. It's kind of the East Coast establishment in politics, media, academia, tends to be fairly progressive, tends to lean Democratic. It's a more familiar term. The river is the world of calculated risk takers, so it kind of starts out in the world of poker. By comparison, poker players are innocent, but then you meet people in crypto, you meet people who work for hedge funds, people in AI, and especially people in Silicon Valley, which is kind of the tip of the spear for the river. I know these people. I am one of these people. I like these people in some ways, but they're competing with the village they're both groups of elites competing for influence and power. And it's getting pretty bloody sometimes, right? You see some parts of the river going more and more for Donald Trump. It's not everybody. I mean, California is still a blue state, but you see, Elon Musk would be a member of the river, a much admired member of the river, or Peter Thiel, for example. And so you've seen more confrontation.
So, yes, Sam Bankman-Fried, Sam Altman, Bill Ackman, also a part of the river. So how do they view themselves, the river? How do they view their role and sort of poking at the village?
I think they see themselves as being a little bit contrarian, which is a tendency that I have myself, and I don't frown on inherently. But I think they thought that as kind of the village has become bluer and bluer and college-educated voters have become bluer and bluer, the contrarian instinct has gotten them, I think in some cases, a little bit red-pilled. When they pick presidential candidates or candidates for, J.D. Vance, for example, although in some ways is a member of the village, he's Yale Law School, best-selling book, or the Blake Masters candidates, I think they don't necessarily have a lot of crossover appeal to mainstream Americans.
So, Nate, when you set up this competition between the village and the river, you say the river is winning at the moment. Tell us why.
Yeah, look, if you look at tech and finance, it continues growing as a share of the economy. These top VC firms do very, very well as far as like a 20% annual return on investment. Maybe I can get 7 or 8% in index funds, so they do a lot better than that. And they're kind of winning the cultural war in certain ways, too. I mean, I don't think that Twitter has been a great financial investment for Elon Musk, but it has, I think, moved the discourse to the right in a lot of ways. And journalists like me are still on Twitter. I still enjoy some features of the platform, but he's shifted the conversation in a lot of ways.
It's interesting, too. We were discussing in the break how the river made a big bet, a lot of them, on Donald Trump when he was running against Joe Biden. We're talking about Bill Ackman and Elon Musk and all these people you write about. And since things have changed, have you picked up on any buyer's remorse now that he's running against Kamala Harris?
You get that sense, right? I mean, if they thought they had like a 75-25 bet, and back in the day when Peter Thiel endorsed Trump in 2016, he was also playing the odds. He thought that Trump was a little bit better than the models and the polls showed, so it's worth making a contrarian bet. But I think they overestimated how much of a personality cult Democrats had around Biden. It's not like Trump, right? Democrats, like I said, they're pretty good at winning elections, and it was so obvious that we could double our odds by replacing the candidate that they did the pragmatic thing, and the GOP was caught very flat-footed by that. As a result, J.D. Vance has been defined in a way that might be hard to undo. Tim Walz, there's a little bit more battle over, and even Harris has seen her favorables increase a lot, but they were really flat-footed. did not empathize with Democrats' predicament, and as a result, I think are in a tougher race now.
Yeah, as you're right. They take risks, and sometimes risks don't pan out. We'll see if this one does.
Absolutely.
The new book is titled On the Edge, The Art of Risking Everything, on sale now. New York Times bestselling author Nate Silver. Nate, always good to talk to you. Thanks for being here.
Of course. Thanks, Nate.